Welcome back to Face the Nation. Well, here's something you don't see very often in Washington. These people have been lining up all weekend in hope of getting a seat in the Supreme Court arguments scheduled for Tuesday. This is a case that could ultimately settle whether the right to marry someone of the same sex is constitutionally protected. We're going to hear from both sides. Evan Wolfson is the head of Freedom to Marry, a group that's lobbied for gays to marry. He's in New York this morning, but I'm going to start with probably the most vocal opponent of same-sex marriage, and that is Tony Perkins. He is the president of the Family Research Council. And Ms. Perkins, I'm going to say this to you up front. You and your group have been so strong in coming out against this and against gay marriage that the Southern Poverty Law Center has branded the Family Research Council an anti-gay hate group. We have been inundated by people who say we should not even let you appear because they, in their view, quote, you don't speak for Christians. Do you think you have taken this too far?
No, Bob, we stand. Well, first of all, let me say thank you for allowing us to continue to have this discussion, because I think it's a discussion that's going to continue on, regardless of what the court says. The court is not going to settle this issue. In fact, I think it does a disservice to both sides if the court weighs in on public policy like this. The courts are decided to interpret the Constitution and the constitutionality of laws, not create public policy. When they do that, they create division and they erect barriers to reaching consensus on public policy like this. And so, no, we stand with millennia of experience that the union of a man and woman, the sacred union of marriage, is the cornerstone of society. That's where kids learn to become citizens.
You said the other day, and I believe these are your words, if the court rules in favor of gay marriage, it would be open season on people of faith.
Absolutely.
I mean, how can you say that?
Oh, I can say it very clearly. When this is what's at stake here, Bob. This is not about the marriage altar. This is about fundamentally altering the culture. Just on Friday, a bakery in Oregon was fined $135,000 for not refusing to serve gay people, but simply saying, we cannot participate in a same-sex wedding because it violates our Christian faith. $135,000. Within hours, though, about $100,000 was raised for this couple until gay activists demanded that GoFundMe take down their site.
But, you know, Mr. Perkins, in the 2 years since the court took up this issue, we now have surveys that show that 6 in 10 Americans now favor gay marriage. That says to me this may be working. 37 states in the district have now legalized same-sex marriage. It is illegal in just 7 states. Doesn't that mean that people want this to be legal?
No. First off, even the Washington Post said the numbers are based on how you ask the question. The nation really is evenly divided. And the narrative 37 states, that works for those who want to say the consensus is on the side of redefinition. But you have to realize only voters in 3 of those states actually voted to allow the redefinition of marriage. In the vast majority of the others, it's been imposed on them by the courts. And for those that would say there's a global consensus, that's not true either. Only 17 of the 193 member states of the United Nations have redefined marriage, and only 1, Brazil, is the only nation that's allowed it to be done by the courts. The court will only supercharge this issue, as they did Roe v. Wade back in 1973.
Did you really say that justices who come down on the side of gays on this should be impeached?
No, I didn't say that.
Because there are reports to that effect.
No, I didn't say that.
What did you say?
Well, I said that I didn't say anything about impeachment of the judges. What I said that they're not the final say on this issue. In our system of government, the courts are not the final say on issues. And for the court to decide on something like this and impose it on the nation, which the polling, even CBS's own polling, says a majority of Americans are opposed to the idea that the Supreme Court would impose this on the nations. They think it's best left to the states. That's how we come to a consensus in this country. And as abortion remains an issue 42 years later, in every election from president on down, it'll continue to be an issue, just as the major Republican candidates last night in Iowa made it an issue.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Perkins, for being with us. And now we go to New York and Evan Wolfson, who is head of Freedom to Marry. Well, you just heard what one of the main opponents to this says, Mr. Wolfson. What's your side of the story here?
Well, I would say that Tony Perkins is really an outlier, and what's to be celebrated here is that the vast majority of Americans have opened their hearts and changed their mind and moved forward to embrace the freedom to marry, and the courts are following where that public opinion has gone. And the reason that's happened is because gay people and non-gay people have talked about shared values of treating others as you'd want to be treated. We've talked about our love, our commitment, real families, not just stereotypes and insinuations. And the American people have moved, and that's to be celebrated, and that's why we feel such hope going into this day in court that we'll be having later this week.
Let me ask you this question. I mean, the polls do show 6 in 10 Americans do favor gay marriage now. But regardless of what you may think of Tony Perkins and his group, there are some very clear, thoughtful people that are on both sides of this issue. What do you say? What is your message to the 4 in 10 who do not favor gay marriage?
You're absolutely right that not everybody opposed or not with us is somebody like Tony Perkins. You're right that there are people who are still thinking it through, and the good news in America is people do think it through and they do move. And I'm confident that these people will see what the majority of Americans have come to see, which is that when we end discrimination, when we end exclusion, families are helped and no one's hurt. You know, last week the Williams Institute, Bob, released a poll showing that in every single state where we brought the freedom to marry, support has gone up. People, when they get a chance to see it for real and to open their hearts and to talk to their neighbors, understand that civil rights advances like this are good. They're good for the community, they're good for the country, they're good for the Constitution, and they're certainly good for families.
What do you think has been the thing that has caused a lot of people to change their mind on this?
The overwhelming engine of change here has been conversation. It's been gay people talking about love, talking about commitment, talking about why marriage matters, the reality of our lives, talking about how the exclusion and discrimination has really harmed us in tangible and intangible ways. And it's also been non-gay people being willing to be part of those conversations and thinking about shared values. Millions of conversations over many, many battles have led to this momentum. And and the fact that
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, the fact that we've now seen in the last 2 years more than 60 courts, state and federal courts, Republican judges as well as Democratic, ruling in favor of the freedom to marry is because the courts, like the country, have come to understand that the command of the Constitution does apply to gay people like other Americans.
None of us who have ever had any experience in sitting in a court watching a trial, or whether it's at the lowest level or at the Supreme Court, knows better than try to guess what the outcome is going to be. But the opinion seems to be that the court is going to rule in your favor on this. But I guess I would ask you this: what happens if they don't?
Yeah. Well, you know, actually 15 years ago today was the day I got to argue in the Supreme Court on the Boy Scout case. And one of the lessons I learned going into the court was count to 5. What it comes down to in the Supreme Court is, will we have 5 justices at least who are ready to rule for us? And of course, we've done everything we can to make the case not only in the court, but in the country, in the court of public opinion, to create the climate for the court to do the right thing. If the court doesn't do the right thing this time, we will keep working. We will build on the progress we've made. We will continue engaging our fellow Americans. We will continue the strategy of winning more states and winning more hearts and minds, and we'll go back before, if necessary, another set of justices. But I'm very, very hopeful that this set of justices will see what all these other judges and what the majority of Americans have seen. It's time to end the freedom to marry, the exclusion from marriage. It's time for the freedom to marry.
All right. Well, Mr. Wolfson, thank you again for joining us, and we'll come back in a minute with our